Our first speaker for tonight is Mika. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Mika, and I'm an alcoholic. Mika. Thanks, Alice, for asking me to share with you tonight. It's an honor to be here. This makes me really nervous. I normally fumble my way through, and I had an extremely large piece of cheesecake last night, and I felt hungover all day long, which is one of the gifts of my sobriety. For one, I care now what goes into my body, so I don't typically eat cheesecake at 11 p.m. And two, my body has healed, and now it rejects things that aren't very good for it and punishes me. So I feel very foggy. But yeah, so I have been sober continuously since April 21st, 2011. And it has been a long journey and very slow. I started drinking about 15, and I didn't get sober until I was 28. And just to give a little brief look into what my drinking looked like, I mean, I'm not the best describer of how alcoholism showed up for me. It was very elusive. I care a lot what everyone thinks about me, and I also care what my mind thinks about me. And so there were all these rules in place about what my drinking could look like and what I would or wouldn't do. So it appeared like there was nothing wrong because I wasn't drinking hard alcohol. I wasn't drinking all day, every day. It was these real rigid rules of you have to wait till 5 p.m. and no hard alcohol. But meanwhile, I'm drinking 15 beers in a 3-hour time span. But that's kind of how it ended, and it started very casually. There was drinking in my home, and I really it was the only life I ever knew. It was normal to drink on the weekend and go out and have fun and when's the next party, and it was all exhilarating. And at a certain point, it wasn't really working anymore. And the 15 beers weren't shutting off the thing. And I was so trapped and turned inward. I needed more relief, right? I it wasn't busting past it anymore. And so I started to pull in prescription pills, and that rapidly advanced my illness. That kind of combination started landing me in the hospital and frequent overdoses, and I couldn't abide by the rules anymore. And my family started to notice what was going on, how come you're conscious 1 second and literally we turn our back and come back and you're gone. And so, they did the things. The one parent said, I'm not talking to you anymore. And the other dove into my life before she found Al-Anon. And, it got really bad, really, really, really bad over the next year. And I thought alcohol was really serving me, and it appeared that way. It appeared like it took my insecurities away. It appeared like I became more confident, but it really wasn't doing that. It was just masking the storm that was inside of me. And so when I was finally able to be separated from alcohol, I feel like I was separated from alcohol. It wasn't something that I woke up one morning and decided I was going to do. It wasn't a choice to me. I couldn't imagine my life any other way. I thought to be sober or to give up what I was doing meant I would live a life wrought with anxiety constantly. Like, I didn't understand how people got up in the morning and like made coffee and walked their dog at like a reasonable hour. Like, it blew my mind how people function normally. And all I'd ever known was like this anxiety and rigidity and defensiveness. And like our book talks about like being at war with the world. Like, I was constantly devastated by my life. Like, and I remember that even before alcohol came in, like I was heartbroken by life and nothing had really happened. Like I was like wallowing in my room listening to the Cranberries until that like escalated into Linkin Park, and then I was like furious at the world. And it's like, but nothing had really happened to me. But that was the state that I lived in. And the only thing that kind of like made any, like, a breath was the thought of alcohol, not even like taking the alcohol, or actually just being unconscious. And that's really what I wanted at the end. Like, I wasn't interested anymore about living or making some sort of life. It was, how can I just not be here? Because this is way, way too painful. And so I was finally separated from alcohol, and I feel like I was in a large period of grace when I came into AA. Like, I had a really hard time engaging in the program, in doing the steps. I sat in my 4th step for like a year and got really, 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 really sick. And thankfully I didn't drink. But, so then I'm in AA with years of sobriety, and everyone's like, oh my God, you're doing so great. And I'm like, I'm dying inside. And now I have this belief that I should have it all together. So I can't be honest about it. I can't raise my hand and say, like, I need more help. Like, I'm not getting this thing. I don't understand. Like, alcohol is out of my life, and I'm still miserable and fighting with everyone. And the world still feels like it's out to get me. And I don't seem to have the same thing that you guys have. And so I don't recommend that, but it was my path. And, eventually I was guided into recommitting to the steps and having an experience. Like, everything I kind of took on and tried to be it rather than actually being transformed from the inside out. And that was just more of the same thing. Like, oh, now I'm kind, and now I'm patient, and now I arrive early. And none of these things changed me, really. It was another mask that I was now wearing. But now I'm in the rooms, and it's just like another layer of hiding, pretending, being like that. It just feels like this to me all the time. And I'm using all my energy to, I'm happy and free. And I wasn't. And so when I finally did the work, I did have quite a profound transformation. And like our book talks about being rocketed into the 4th dimension. And I wasn't rocketed. I feel like I took the Pony Express there, but I got there anyway. Like, it was a slow process. And our book talks about that option as well. And I started to have an experience with a higher power. And this deep knowing that had been inside of me all along. Like, my sponsor used to tell me, and still reminds me, like, there's nothing that you need to do to get connected. You're already connected. It's just blocked. You're blocked. And I always liked that idea, like, there isn't anything that I have to do. Because, I mean, yes, we have to engage in the program, but, like, that's the same force to me. It's like, I'm still the doer. I'm still the mover. I'm still the one that's trying to make everything happen. And it's like, no. All I have to do is pay attention. Like, all I have to do is see how I'm being used and to pray and ask and turn. And I get moved from over here to over here, and all of a sudden I become intuitively guided. And I can hear something else that's trying to speak to me. I like to talk about God as that something with the capital S, like something said to me, or it's this whisper over here that isn't the onslaught that's usually driven by fear, is what I found out. I didn't know I was afraid my whole life, and that underlay everything. And I start to feel like perhaps I could not, be the hall monitor of the universe anymore. Even though I still try, and I slip into these things like, no, I'm pretty undefended these days. Like, I remember just walking around like waiting for you, waiting for you to say something to me or snub me. And I don't feel that anymore. It's gone. It's slipped away. And it continues to slip away. And I've felt an opening inside of me, and I have the ability to go with the flow. I had a belief that, like, if I was in alignment with God's will for me, it would be easy. And found that was an old idea, that it's me who has to be easy. It's like I can bump up against the rocks in the river. They're there. They're not going to go away. The stream isn't going to open for me, and I'm going to sail to the horizon. It's like I can be easy as I move down the river, and that's who I be today. But like, this isn't something that, again, like this thing that I pinned to my chest to be good. I thought I had to be good, and it's a result of doing the work and having a relationship with a higher power. And these things pop up, of course, and I offer them over. I ask, thank you, but I'm no longer blaming everyone for everything. Like, that's new, I have for the most part, unless I'm like in a new dating situation, I have a lot of peace. But our book talks about that too. Like, it's sex matters. I pray for sanity because that's an area that like needs God to come in, but most of the time, like, I'm peaceful. And there's a lot of space now for me to think about you for once. And like, what is remarkable to me as I reflect back is like, I used to think like about selfishness, like, oh, you're an a-hole because you're selfish. It's like, it wasn't something that like I think any of us wake up and choose to do, like that's, it's a result of being so inside of myself that I can't see you. And now I can see you, and I can see something else happening, and I can offer some assistance to my mom, and an extra phone call, and continue to repair relationships and heal relationships. It took me 9 years to make amends to my father. He wouldn't speak to me. And most of that was because, like, you could still feel when I was in my early recovery, because I hadn't had a transformation, that you could still feel it on me, like all of that tenseness. And he just was like, no, I don't want anything to do with you. And many years later, I called him when I got the nudge from God, the universe, something, whatever you want to call it. It was like, it's time. It's time. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. Yeah, okay, we get it. Do it anyway. And he's like, oh, you sound different. You sound different. I'm like, I want to drive up there and come see you. Is that okay? He's like, oh, yeah, it is, you know? And anyway, that's a story for another time. But, like, it's taken time to mend relationships. And so, like, I'm still very, very much on this journey. But, like, and, you know, like, I don't have all the outside things that sometimes I hear people talk about as, like, mile markers of their life. I don't. But, and it makes me emotional. But, like, I'm good in here, and I'm good with what's out there. And I feel like, for the most part, I'm good with you guys. And that's enough for me. So, thank you.
Please join me in welcoming Alice from Alice Blank. Parts unknown. Welcome, Alice.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. I'm Alice. I'm an alcoholic. Hi, Alice. Hello. There's nobody there. It's okay. Good evening. Happy Saturday. Welcome to all of those that identified as new and those who didn't. Welcome if you're uncomfortable. Welcome if you have time sober and you don't know what you're doing. I want to thank Mika for speaking and opening us up this evening. Mika is my spiritual advisor, as they like to call it in the big book. I met her like a year and a half ago or so, a couple years ago, and I was telling my friend Kendall right before this that I'm like kind of obsessed with Mika because of her foundation in Alcoholics Anonymous and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I love that our relationship is rooted in the literature, and it's rooted in the power that we have that helps guides us through this life. And that she never really tells me what to do with my life. If anything, she tells me to go to Spirit, to go to God, to go to my Creator, and to trust this process. And I love that because when I got into Alcoholics Anonymous, I had no idea what this was about. I had no idea what alcoholism was. And I didn't know what we were doing here. I didn't know what the steps were. I didn't know how that was going to relieve me from alcoholism. I have some time to talk about it, so let's get into it. I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous when I was 15 years old. This meeting in particular was one of the meetings that I came to every Saturday, and I remember coming here as a teenager, and I would actually wear like high heels, and I would get all cute, and then I would go to like a young people's event afterwards and stay out till like the wee hour of the morning, you know, and it was very just like, I was putting on a show, you know, and I wanted to be a part of something. And when I came into AA, it felt really good to be a part of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous because you guys kind of swooped me in, you know, and I was dropping out of high school and I had no sense of self and I had no direction and I just wanted an answer. I wanted a real answer as to what was happening in my life and why I was feeling the way that I was feeling. And what I found was Alcoholics Anonymous and the Fellowship, and I got really immersed in it. And then what I found a little bit later on is that cannot keep me sober, that meetings will not keep me sober. And that what's going to keep me sober is the process of the 12 steps and a relationship that I have with a power greater than myself, and that's going to solve my problem. Nothing else, no human power. To give you a little background of my life, I'm going to tell a lot of stories here, and what I want to like drive home the most is that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is in the literature. It's in the first 164 pages. And I am only sober because I've had an experience with the 12 steps. And so I'm going to tell you a lot of stories. I'm going to tell you a lot of what my life was or what it is now. And I'm going to try to paint a really good picture of a transformation that I've had, a general way of what I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm like now. But what I want to drive home the most, like I'm going to say again, is that if you've not had an experience with the big book, with the literature, with the 12 steps, I urge you to do so. because I have, and I continue to stay sober, and I continue to live a life that is free and that offers abundance. And I'm far removed from drugs and alcohol, and I haven't had to suffer from the obsession to want to drink or put anything in my body. And that is a miracle, and that's a gift, you know. So I grew up in a pretty chaotic family. You know, I watched alcoholism run its way through my family really young, and from the earliest ages that I can remember. I watched my mom in the depths of her alcoholism. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here tonight, but she is recovered. She has 16 years, and she is my Eskimo into Alcoholics Anonymous, as well as my brother. Hi, Chris. Thank you. Okay. But when I was really young, I just remember watching alcoholism in my family, right? And like what that looked like was from like 5 or 6 years old. It was a lot of strangers in and out of the house. It was no electricity. It was no food on the table. Or if there was food on the table, my mom went to the 99-cent store. She came home. She put it on the table and was like, here you go. And then she locked herself in the room for a few days, you know? And or she would give us some money and she would say, just get out of the house. You know, and I was like 6 or 7. I have a sister who's a couple years older than me. She was about 9, and we left the house, and we would just walk around, right? And we were living in the desert. We were living in Lancaster at the time, and we were originally from Venice Beach, but we did a little geographic to the desert. And so here we are, just kids walking around, you know, and we found this like little plaza, this movie theater, and we're just going from one movie to the next, the dollar movies, and we're just hopping around to these movies because we didn't know what to do, you know, and then we'd get home, and then it's again, like, who are these people in my house? Okay, the cops are here. Okay, my brother's in trouble. Okay, what's happening? You know, and I'm just a kid. Like, I'm just a kid, you know, and that happened for a few years. It did, right? And so, like, I'm saying that to say that, like, alcoholism doesn't discriminate, and like self-knowledge avails me something, but it doesn't avail me enough, right? Because as I got older, I had all of this life experiences with alcoholism, watching it in my family, destroying it, right? And yet I still took a drink. So I'll just go through it. When my mom got sober, I was 9 years old, and we got relocated back to Venice, and my mom ended up going into Tarzana Treatment Center in Long Beach. And then she started showing up for visitations, and she started getting sober, and she started going to meetings, and then she got into a sober living for women and children. And all of a sudden, my mom's like in my life, you know, and I'm like, whoa, like this is cool, you know, and I'm like 9 or 10 years old, and then I'm in middle school, and like I'm living with my mom in this sober living, and then for the first time I like ingested something, right? It was like 8th grade graduation on the beach in Venice. It was great, and everybody was doing it. It was Bailey's eggnog, and yeah, and we drank it, and it was gross, and I did not like it, but I knew that like it was the thing to do because everybody was doing it. And then I remember taking care of my friend because she drank more than I did. So I took care of her for a little bit. But after that, it was like, okay, I don't really need this right now, right? I'm like 12 years old, 13 years old. I got high school in my sight. I'm like, okay, I got to go to high school. I want to be on the cheer team. Like, I'm going to do some big things here. And at this point, my mom's a few years sober. She's going to AA, right? Like, she would hit the Marina Center rush hour on Tuesdays and Fridays. And so we would go with her. And she would pick us up from high school, and then we'd sit in the car. We'd go in, we'd grab cookies or something, and then we would come back and sit in the car while she went to the meeting. And that's what I knew about Alcoholics Anonymous. It was a place to go. There was people there, and it gave me my mom back. That's all I really knew. And so then I get into high school, and I was a cheerleader. I was JV captain my freshman year, and it was really exciting, and I loved it. And then I started getting invited to parties. And that sister that's 2 years older than me, she was also in that same high school, and she was the polar opposite of me. She was a skater, she was a tomboy, and we ended up at the same parties, and here we are. And I remember, like, the first time I really got drunk. And I remember my mom calling me and saying, okay, like, sing your ABCs. So I sang my ABCs, you know, it was good. And she was like, all right, now sing it backwards. And I was like, that's not going to happen. You know, like, who even can do that, right? But like, so here it was, this excitement, right, of alcohol. And then all of a sudden, when I go back to school that week, everyone's like, okay, where's the next party? Okay, I know, you know, let's go to the next party. And that's what it became about. It was no longer about like the grades or the cheer team or whatever. It was like, when's the next thing going to happen? When am I going to get drunk again? When am I going to get blacked out again? Because I started blacking out. And that sister would show up at the parties with me, and she would try to moderate and control my drinking. And we would just not have it, like we were getting into it, you know, and she would end up having to take care of me. And yeah, and then I around like sophomore year in high school, we like kind of moved to the South Bay and Hermosa Beach. And my mom gave me the option. She said, do you want to stay at Venice High or do you want to go to a new school? And at this point, I felt like I need to change. Like I need to do something different because I'm already lost. Like I'm already just going down, you know? And so I switched high schools. I went to Miracosta. That lasted like a semester. And, and we lived like 8 minutes. I timed it. We lived 8 minutes away from Miracosta. And I remember, like, my mom would wake up early in the morning, and then she would drive to go to work in Marina Del Rey. And so she was like, okay, walk to school. That's all you got to do. And I would circle the neighborhoods of Miracosta, and I would put stuff into my body until I felt okay enough just to get to class. And then when I finally got to class, I was just riddled with fear. And I had no, like, there was no community that I found there. The people that I did find there drank like I did. And so what happened was I skipped high school. I stopped going completely, to be honest with you. I would stay out till the wee hour of the morning. My mom would come looking for me. I would be grounded. She would take my phone. Like it was like this, you know, and it's like kind of like teenager stuff, right? But what I didn't know was happening was that I was developing a relationship with drugs and alcohol that I was not going to be able to solve on my own. And that I continued to go back to the drink regardless, right? And so summer going into junior year, I had a night out that really scared me because I really, really liked what happened, and I tried some harder stuff and accompanied with alcohol. And so I went to an AA meeting with my brother, and it was a Sunday night young people's meeting in Hermosa Beach. And the meeting was packed full of young people, and it was very rowdy, and everybody was happy. And I thought, wow, like I kind of want to be here, you know? And so I came back to the Hermosa Alano Club the next day. I ended up dropping out of high school and making getting sober my full-time gig. So I was 15, and I would go to the 9:30, and then I would go to retreads, and then I would go to a night meeting, and then I would hit late night at the Marina Center. And I would do that with my brother. And we were just doing it every day, right? And like I said, like I started to get involved in the fellowship of AA. I started to get commitments. I was a secretary. I was the chip person. I was the literature person. Like I was like all of the things, you know? And people started to know who I was, you know? And all of a sudden, like I wore like, okay, I'm sober. I'm 16 and I'm sober, you know? Here I am, right? And I had no idea what I was up against. I had no idea what alcoholism was. All I knew at that point was, okay, I have alcoholism because it runs in my family. That's it. That's it. A little bit after a year sober, the thought creeped in. And it was, you know what? You got sober at 16. It's been a year. Like, you can do this. It's just a phase. Like, you can do this. It's going to be fun. You know? And my sponsor at the time, when I had 8 months sober, she called me up and said, I'm not an alcoholic anymore. And I thought, well, that's crazy, you know, like it shattered my world. And I want to talk about this a little bit because I was completely sponsor reliant. Everything that I did was, I had to call her and like ask her, what can I do? What do I do? What do I do? You know? And so when she called me up and said, I don't have alcoholism, that shattered everything that I thought that I knew. And at that point, like I wasn't really willing to get into the work. I just went to the next person, and then I went to the next person. And so a couple weeks after I had a year sober, and when my mind said, you know what, this is just, it was a phase, I hit up that old sponsor and I said, you know what, this is what I'm thinking. I stayed sober for a year, and she said, yeah, you did, you're good. You stayed sober for a year at 16, you're totally good. So I proceeded to drink. I did, and then I drank with that sponsor. And it was a great time. It really was. It was. And, but I want to talk about that because now I live a life with this process where like I talk to God or my creator more than I talk to my sponsor, you know? And what that shows me is that like I cannot be reliant on human power. I can't. And like I said, I'm grateful that I have somebody that is really immersed in this program and this process. And so I started to basically experience the vicious cycles of alcoholism, and I drank for a little bit, and I did things that I said I didn't want to do, you know, and I was 17, and my mom said, okay, if you're not going to go to school and you're not going to be sober, you got to get a job. So I got a job at Jamba Juice, and then I was working at Jamba Juice, and it wasn't enough to supply my drinking, so I was panhandling at gas stations. And then I was finding myself in motel rooms in really not good neighborhoods and staying up for nights on end and nights on end. And then I had some thoughts of, you know what, wait, like you saw this growing up, like you saw what this does, like what are you doing? And that wasn't enough for me to put down the drink. And I continued to drink. And And I would get sober. I got sober another time, and what I would do is I would show up at AA, and I would go to a meeting and I would share and I would say, I did it again, I drank, but what I was failing to do was to open the big book and to read and to identify and to really try to understand what it is that we're dealing with here. And because I had some old ideas, like I thought that I knew what was happening. And so what happened again? I went back to the drink, and there's a line in the doctor's opinion that I hold so close to me that is an example of my alcoholism that I could see so clearly in my evidence. And it says that these men were no longer drinking to escape. They were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control. There was a point in my drinking where it was beyond my mental control, regardless of what was happening around me. There was an incident where my sister was in labor, the sister that's 2 years older than me, right? She was in labor. She was at the hospital. I wasn't sober at the time, and I was there, and then I stepped out so that I could drink. And then hours went by, and my mom called me, and she said, your sister's giving birth. She wants to know why you're not here. And I didn't know. Like, I wanted to be there with every fiber in my being, right? Like, I really did. What was happening was I was experiencing alcoholism, and I didn't even get to see that until I was going through the work this time around, right? But that's alcoholism for me, is that it no longer was about, I want to escape my feelings, or like, I want to escape my reality. It was like, I'm going to drink even when I don't want to. Even when I don't want to. So, this last time that I got sober, I actually was sober for like 10 and a half months or so, and I was doing the do, and by doing the do, I mean I was walking around and I was talking and I was speaking, because if you stay around here long enough, you get the lingo, you learn the language, and you can probably talk really well, right? And so that's what I was doing. And the thought creeped in again, and it was like, okay, you're 18 now, you can drink successfully. This is how you're going to do it, right? And so I texted the one friend that I knew that was going to say, you know what, you're right, yeah, you can drink, and I love you no matter what, and like, I got you. And I remember that night so clearly, because I was with some people that used to be sober, that weren't sober anymore, and we were all talking to each other about how AA is so good. It's so good, and it's so helpful, and it's so beautiful for the people that need it, but it's not for us, It's not for us. And this one person said, well, if you're not going to do it now, you're going to do it at some point. And so I did. And I remember going to bed, like as soon as I ingested whatever it was, like I was like, I just want to go to sleep because I want to wake up sober again. And the next day I woke up and I was, oh man, like I had a willingness that I'd never before been able to muster. And is this water for me? Can I have this? Yep. Thank you. Yeah, it was one night. And I remember waking up the next day and I reached out to this girl, and she said, okay, come pick me up. I'll hang out with you, and she came and hung out with me. We hung out all day together, and I ended up going to the 5:30 book study on a Wednesday night at the Hermosa Alano Club, and I remember talking to a guy right after that meeting in the coffee bar who was working the coffee bar at the time, and I told him I did it again. I drank, like, what's happening? I feel stupid, like I relapsed, and he told me something so profound that I heard in that moment, and what he said is the quality of your sobriety is not directly proportionate on how much time you have. Otherwise, you wouldn't see people with 20 plus years going out and taking a drink. And for some reason, I heard him. I heard him when he said that. And so I was willing, and I went to a meeting right after that I was secretary of. It was a Wednesday night speaker meeting, and I told them I relapsed. I'm here, and I'm willing to give up my commitment. And they said, no, you keep it. You keep it, and you come back. And so I did. And a few days later, I met this woman who wasn't from my area, but she came to speak at that Sunday night young people's meeting, and she talked a lot about God, and she talked a lot about women, which were two things that I was very, very unfamiliar with at that point. And so I went up to her after, and I said, okay, I'm kind of considering getting a different sponsor. Are you available? And she said, are you willing to go to any lengths to gain victory over drugs and alcohol? And I said, yes. And she told me to do a few things and call her the next day, and so I did. And she lived in like Covina, and she would drive to Rancho Palos Verdes, where I was living with my family at the time, an hour and a half, 2 hours in traffic just to read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous with me once a week. And what started happening was I started to experience like a psychic change, right? A transformation. And it started happening before I even knew what was happening, right? All of a sudden I was 6 months sober. I had gone through the 12 steps for the first time. And she said, okay, now give it away. right? And I was like 19 years old, and I was like, who am I going to help? You know, like 19, like 6 months, what? And and I can't tell you like what really happened in those 6 months, right? Like of like 1 through 12, like what really happened. All I can tell you is that I had the experience, and from that point on, like I continued to give it away. And as a result of that, and as a result of staying in this experience and continuing to give it away, I continue to stay sober, and I continue to experience things that are beyond my conception. And so 19 years old, I started sponsoring women, and it didn't matter if they were older than me, younger than me, married, divorced, had kids. It did not matter. All that mattered was I had an experience with the work that I was willing to pass on. And I remember being like a year sober, and I was on fire. I was on fire. I thought that like nothing else mattered, and like I was just really self-driven, and I was really excited about life, and I was serving at a restaurant, and so I had a little bit of money, and then I met this guy at the late night meeting who was like from Long Island, and he had 30 days, and I loved his accent, and so I was like, this is going to be great. And and so we ended up getting together, and I moved him into my mom's house, and moved him out of sober living into my mom's house, and and here I was, you know, a year sober, and within just a short amount of time, he ended up getting loaded, crashing my car, and I got fired. I was like, whoa, that's really crazy, you know? What is this, right? Like, what is this really? And all that showed me was that, like, it's not about me, you know? It is not about me, and that, like, there's divine intervention, and it will continue to happen in my life, right? And so when I think that I know what's going to happen, or when I think that I know what's best for me, in those spots, like when I'm completely wrapped in self, like you were talking about, it's like there is a connection, there is a power that's looking out for me, regardless of how I feel or what I think. And so, yes, these circumstances happen, and yes, it felt like my life was kind of like unraveled. But what I found was that when I went back to the literature, when I went back to the 12 steps, when I went back to sponsoring and making that my main focus, like everything else played out, right? I told the guy, like, I can't help you. Like, you need to get sober, and like this, I can't do this, you know? And the day after I told him that, the place that had my car was like, oh, you have insurance. Like, here's a new car. I was like, whoa, you know, that's God, right? I can tell you that, like, as a part of the amends process, that sister who's 2 years older than me, you know, she ended up having another child, and a few years ago, 3 years ago, and I remember, and I was like I was in the birthing room, you know, and I got to watch her give birth, and like that's like a result of the process. And she leaned over and said, I'm so grateful that you were here this time, right? 4 months ago, my sister had another child. I was in the birthing room, right? And like she was like so happy that I was there. That is a result of the Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I do want to talk about a power greater than myself for a little bit, because I believe that like that is what this book is about. It talks about it. It says the main object of this book is to enable you to have a relationship with a power greater than yourself that will help solve your problem. My problem is not drugs and alcohol. That is but a symptom, right? That's only what's going on the outside. Like I need something. I need to put something in me so that I'm okay, or that I have this like delusion that I am okay. And yes, I developed a phenomenon of craving that like when I put one in, I can't stop regardless of what's happening around me. Yes, absolutely, 100%. But how do I even get there? The book talks about that like the mind is the crux of the problem. If I could just not pick up that drink, we're good. In fact, the doctor's opinion talks about it, says the only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. Just don't pick it up. Don't pick it up. Okay, cool. But what's next? How do I not pick it up? Right? And I struggled with that for years. And so the mind is where it comes into play, right? And I get to see that, like, kind of like how I told you, like my mind will constantly tell me, I need a drink, I need a drink, I need a drink. And this is how. It's going to be different this time. This is how. How do I get away from that thought, right? Well, that's what the 12 steps are for. Like I get to get unblocked, like you talked about. I'm blocked. There's a channel to my creator, to this power, this spirit, whatever it is. And there's stuff in there, and it's all manifestations of self. And at the root of that, it's all fear. And so I get to look at my life. I get to put it on paper, and I get to see like, wow, I filter life through the lens of like my own experiences, right? Like whatever I went through as a kid, like I carry that with me, right? Whatever I go through as an adult, I carry that with me. And that's the way that I operate constantly. What the steps allow me to do is I get to break that down. I get to see what the truths, right? In the inventory process, it talks about this is a fact-finding and a fact-facing process. We get to see what is real, what the truths are, right? Because there's so many lies, so many self-delusion, self-propulsion, fear, all of it. And for a while in my sobriety too, like I took it to the other end and I became like master self-deprecator, you know? And I was like, oh my God, like Adrian knows, like I was so hard on myself constantly. Wow, I'm so consumed with self all the time, you know? And it was like this like crazy, and I've learned to not do that today, you know, because what this process allows us is a true freedom from that. And so to get to that relationship with God, I had to have an experience with the steps. I had to get uncovered. I had to like discard all these things, right? Discover the truths and clear that channel and really get to have that experience. And when I first got sober and I started to look at my relationship with God or my idea of God, up until this point, I had developed this belief in God that was purely attached to the passing of my father. And when I was 12 years old or so, I got the call that my dad had passed away, you know, and my dad wasn't really a part of my life. And he was in and out of jail, and he got deported back to England because he was in and out of jail. And I didn't talk to him for years. And when I was like living in Venice on the beach, we ran into his half brother, and they called him on the spot, and I got to talk to him, right? And his voice was so familiar. And that year we were supposed to see him for Christmas, and then a few months went by, and he passed away, right? So I came to Alcoholics Anonymous with that conception, that prejudice, and I thought, well, if there's a God, like there isn't, because my dad passed away, and I didn't even get to see him, you know, and for the last time, and so I remember having one conversation with another alcoholic about this prejudice, and he said, you know what, maybe God let you talk to your dad one last time before he passed. And I never thought about it that way. And so at that point, I started to believe like in God, and it was attached to my dad. And then I met this man at a meeting, and I was sharing about this, and he came up to me, and he was like, wait, I know your dad. I never even said his name. And he knew who he was. And this guy has been sober and has been sober for a while. And all of a sudden, this man started popping up in my life. Oh, at a Starbucks. Oh, at a convention, right? And I was like, this is God, you know? And and it was amazing, right? And so at 4 years sober, a series of events happened in my life, and it became evident that like that man's not my dad. And so like as a human, I was like, kind of like, who's my dad? You know what? But also as an alcoholic, I thought, well, what's God? If up until this point, I've believed this so far, then what's God? And there's a portion in We Agnostic that talks about this. It says, it gives us two conditions. It says if we're able to lay aside prejudice and express a willingness, we commence to get results, even though it's fully impossible for us to define God, that power which is God, right? And so what ended up happening was I became more willing and more open, and I started to become more vulnerable with everybody in my life, and I started to share this experience, and I started to be open to like, okay, maybe there is something else out there that doesn't have to be attached to him, right? But there is something. And I continued to take the action, I continued to put in the work, and I continued to have experiences with this power. More recently, I've had a lot more experiences with this. And I want to talk about it. So I recently got 7 years sober in September, and it was not the way that I thought that it was going to be. You know, it really wasn't. And I can tell you that at the first of this month, November, I got to move into an apartment that I had been crashing at for 4 months. You know, I was sleeping on the couch, you know, and I had met this man in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was like boy meets girl on AA campus, and it was this beautiful story of like who we were, and like we were engaged and we were living together, and it was beautiful, you know, and what ended up happening was like the relationship couldn't happen anymore. And I couldn't see it then, and I think I see a little bit of it now. But I had made this man and this relationship my everything. You know, I was still doing the things. I was still going to the meetings and sponsoring and doing what I had to do. But inside, my dependence was upon this person. And I didn't even know. I didn't even know it, right? And I couldn't understand why we tried and we tried and we tried, and it wasn't working. And all throughout this time, I remember my sponsor suggest, okay, why don't you do this prayer? If you're to stay, show you how to stay. If you're to go, show you how to go. So I started doing that. I said, okay, if I'm to stay, show me how to stay. If I'm to go, show me how to go. And I thought the whole time that I was being shown how to stay. And he decided, you know what? I can't do this. And a couple weeks prior to that, I had given the ring back in a fit, right? And so I was shown how to go. And so then I was put on a couch, right? And I was so scared. I was terrified. I remember calling my sponsor and just being like, I was crying my eyes out because I was so terrified of what was going to happen next. I had no idea, how am I going to be okay? What financially, like, what am I going to do? You know? And it was all of this fear. But you know what? You know what is that I had this crazy deep inner strength that I didn't even know was there, that I could tap into. And all of a sudden I'm sleeping on this couch and my stuff is in storage. And I'm okay, and I'm happy. Yes, there's pain for sure, and there's fear for sure. But I started waking up early in the morning, and I started going on these walks. And I started to have experience with steps 10 and 11 on a daily basis. And it redeveloped and recreated this relationship with God that I thought that I knew, right? And I do want to read a little bit from that portion, actually, because I think it is absolutely profound. And I don't think it's talked about enough. And I've been in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous for like 10 years. And like I said, you get to hear a lot of the things. And like for a long time, I thought that like, you know what, like I'm going to have to go to 7 meetings a week and I'm going to have to hang on to my seat and I'm going to have to get 7 commitments and I'm always going to be out to get myself. And like, if I could just make it to a meeting, like I'm going to be good. And in fact, that's not what the literature says, you know. So in step 10, I want to point out that like step 10 is to be done all throughout the day. It's not to be written at the end of the night. It's to be done all throughout the day. And it says, we vigorously commence this way of living as we cleaned up the past, as we continue to make amends. We have entered the world of the Spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. Wow. I can understand what's happening around me. I can be effective. This is not an overnight matter. It's going to take some time. It should continue for our lifetime. And then it tells us 4 things to do. It says, watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. Just watch. Like I don't have to decipher it. I don't have to figure it out. Like I can just become the watcher, the position of the watcher. I don't have to judge it. I don't have to do any of that. I could just watch for it. When it crops up, I ask God at once to remove it. That's my first instinct. Hey, remove this, right? I can't tell you how many times today that I prayed, God, remove this fear of speaking in front of 100 people, like, and wanting to sound good and wanting to be this person that maybe I'm not, right? Like, remove this. Help me talk to the newcomer. Help me talk to the person that's sitting in their seat, that's uncomfortable, that doesn't know what alcoholism is, that doesn't know what the steps are, that doesn't know the experience that I've had, that I want to continue to have. Let me talk to them, right? Then I discuss it with someone immediately. Told my friend Kendall, hey, I want to vomit, you know, like this is what's happening, right? And then we make amends quickly if we've harmed anyone. If I step on anybody's toes, I make it up right there in that moment. And then we resolutely turn our thoughts to somebody we can help. I think about someone else. And I did. I actually thought about a girl that I work with who's right now driving to Utah to get her car because she's been in sober living. And she's driving to Utah to get her car. She's very excited to get her car. And I thought about her. I hope she has a safe drive, you know. I hope she gets back and she's still sober, you know. And then it talks about the 10-step promises. It says, and we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. Cool. So like like I said, I don't suffer from the obsession to want to drink or put anything in my body. I don't. Sometimes I do suffer from wanting to fight though, right? And what this 10-step application promises is that we don't have to. We don't have to. For this time, sanity will have returned. Okay, cool. I can be sane. I don't have to think that like my thinking is so skewed, right? We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. I remember being 6 months sober and going to Coachella because the restaurant that I was at had a little booth there, and they said, "Do you want to go work at Coachella?" And I said, "Yes, let's do that." You know, because I never wanted to pay to go to Coachella, but I will get paid to go to Coachella. And I was 6 months sober and I'd gone through the steps. I was 19 and I was the only sober one there with my work. And I stayed up till like 3 a.m. at the silent disco and I was having the time of my life and not once did I think about wanting to drink. That is the promises, right? Let's see, we react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. Like I don't have to force it, like it will just happen. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That is the miracle of it. We are not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we have been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. That is our experience. That is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. When I think of fit spiritual condition, I think of my relationship with you, and I think of my relationship with his power, and I think of my relationship with myself. And for me to be God-centered, I have to be other-centered, and I can't be self-centered, And the only way that I'm allowed to do that is by continuing to practice this. It says in our literature, too, that Bill had acquired some ideas which he put into practical application at once. I have to continue to practice this on a daily basis in every facet of my life, not just at a meeting when I'm speaking, not just with my sponsor or a girl that I'm working with, right? But every facet of my life and every relationship at work. I snubbed somebody the other day at work. I did. And yesterday I got to talk to that person and say, you know what? That was childish of me. I could have done better and I will do better, right? Every facet of my life. Because if I don't, who's to say that's not going to take me back to a drink? I'm not immune to this thing. I'm not. But what I have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition, And I am going to talk about step 11 for these last 5 minutes because this is something that I'm very, very, very devoted to right now, and I believe wholeheartedly in this. Prayer meditation. We shouldn't be shy on this matter of prayer. Better men than we are using it constantly. It works if we have the proper attitude and work at it. It would be easy to be vague about this matter, yet we believe we can make some definite and valuable suggestions. When we retire at night, we constructively review our day. So this is like the night portion, like when I get home, which I really don't want to do at night. And I'm not that great at it, if I'm being quite frank. But I've memorized this paragraph, and I actually do consider it, and I do it in prayer, and I get to ask myself all of these questions. And I'm not going to really go into it too crazy. But if you're interested, it's on page 86, and you hear people talk about it, I think, a lot. And they say, I read 86 through 88 this morning or tonight, and I continue to do it every day, And for me, like, I have to put it into prayer. I have to put it into meditation. I have to actually review constructively what my day looked like, what my relationship with self looked like, what my relationship with others looked like. Like, I have to. That's the only way it's really going to work, And on awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking. That is like one of the first things that I do when I get up in the morning. I do get up and make a cup of coffee, and then I go outside. But on my morning walk, I ask God to direct my thinking, that it be divorced from selfishness, self-pity, self-seeking, dishonest motives. And that when fear comes up or indecision comes up, God, give me an intuitive thought. Give me an intuitive decision, right? Then I consider other people, maybe someone I'm working with, maybe a friend, maybe a coworker, maybe a family member, and I pray for them also. And a short one that I say all the time is just show me where to go, show me who to serve, and show me what to do. That's it. And there are some promises around step 11. And it says, what used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. Wow. Being still inexperienced and having just made conscious contact with God, it is not probable that we are going to be inspired at all times. I'm going to have some old ideas sometimes. You know what I mean? I'm going to fall short. I'm going to make a mistake. Like, I'm going to get my hands dirty. It's going to get a little messy, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that I'm out of this thing, right? Nevertheless, we find that our thinking, while as time passes, be more and more on the plane of inspiration. We come to rely upon it. We can rely on our thinking. I don't have stinking thinking. I don't need to, go to meetings just to be okay, Like, I could go to meetings as a privilege, right? And as a pleasure to give back, to connect with the community, to seek the newcomer, to pass on this experience, to experience the fellowship. All I ever wanted through the years of my sobriety was a tribe, was a fellowship to connect with, was to feel a part of. And I didn't know that it was going to take my relationship ending and me living on a couch to get there. I didn't, but I found it. I didn't know that my relationship with God and my relationship with self, like all I ever wanted, I was telling like my brother this the other day, all I really wanted when I was younger, I don't know why, but I had this little dream of like having my own place and coming home with like a dish to put my keys in, you know? And now I have my own place with a roommate, but now I have my own place, you know? I have a garage clicker. Like, and this is the material realm, right? Like these are the things outside of me. Yes, it's like great. But what I know and what I feel is that like I'm truly free regardless. I didn't have the things. There was a point where like I didn't have it. It all combusted in front of me, you know? And I didn't think of drinking once. Not once. And that is the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous, you know? So if you're new or you're not new, and like I said, like you're unfamiliar with this process of what we have here, of what the literature is even talking about, please get involved. Like come talk to me. Come talk to us. You know, we're here to help. It is free. We're willing to give it away because when we give it away, we get to experience it as well. That's all I have. Thanks.